There are moments in life when you toss and turn in bed, stare at the ceiling, try to distract yourself, but the worries are still there. It feels as if there's a constant noise inside you, a storm that won't let your soul rest. And even though you try to pray, even though you whisper silently that everything will be fine, that inner voice doesn't go away. You ask yourself why you can't find peace, why you keep feeling that weight, that anxiety that just won't leave. This video is for you, for that heart-seeking rest, for that mind longing for relief. Today we're going to talk about how to find peace when your mind won't stop thinking. Not a temporary peace, but the kind that only God can give. A peace that calms not only your thoughts but also your spirit. Because sometimes it's not that faith is missing, it's that the mind leaves no room for silence. And there, in the middle of the noise, is where God wants to speak to you. He doesn't need your mind to be perfect to bring peace. He only needs you to let him in. Now let's begin with this first part. First part, silencing the inner noise to hear God. When the mind begins to race, the first impulse is usually to run away from what we're thinking. Sometimes we try to escape, distract ourselves, and cover the noise with more noise, but that only increases the tension. The biblical path begins differently. It begins by stopping, recognizing what's happening inside, and bringing it into God's presence. The peace we seek is not the absence of thoughts. It's the loving order that God brings to our minds when we make room for him. That's why in this first part, we're going to build a practical and spiritual foundation to quiet the mind, not with magic, but with discipline, understanding, and faith applied to everyday life. The first thing you must understand is that the mind is not your enemy. It tries to protect you by anticipating problems and reviewing possibilities. But when that mechanism gets out of control, anxiety multiplies. This is where faith makes all the difference. Instead of believing that everything depends on you, you choose to trust. Philippians chapter 4 verses 6 and 7 teaches that the peace of God guards our thoughts and our hearts when we present our burdens with thanksgiving. That's not a distant theory. It's a real practice. To present means to name what you feel and hand it over with trust. To give thanks means to remember that God has sustained you before and he will do it again. Another thing that can help you greatly is to create a small routine to stop the noise. Most racing thoughts come in waves. If you let them pass on their own, the cycle repeats. You need a gesture, a signal, something that allows you to stop. You can do it with a simple method: stop, breathe, and trust. Stop to recognize what you feel. Breathe to return to the present, and trust to turn your attention back to God. Repeat internally a short phrase without quotation marks, such as, "God is with me," as you exhale. It doesn't matter if it feels hard at first. Little by little, your mind will learn the way back to calm. It's also very helpful to train your breathing as a bridge between faith and the body. In Psalm 46 verse 10, God says, "Be still and know that I am God." That stillness doesn't mean immobility, it means presence. Try this simple breathing exercise for a few minutes. Inhale slowly, counting to 4, hold for a moment, and exhale, counting to 6, while silently repeating a truth, such as "My soul rests in God." This type of breathing calms the body while focusing your mind on the divine presence. Another practice that can greatly transform your inner state is writing. When your mind is full of thoughts, writing allows you to put them outside yourself. Take a sheet of paper and write what worries you without filters. Then separate it into 2 columns, what you can control and what you cannot. What you can control, act on it. What you can't, give it to God through a short prayer. This simple habit prevents your mind from repeating the same ideas over and over again. Another essential practice is to guard what enters your mind. The Bible teaches us to keep our hearts, for from them flow the springs of life, and that includes what we hear and see. Today we're surrounded by constant stimuli that prevent inner silence, so make time without screens, especially when you wake up and before going to sleep. Turn off unnecessary notifications and use your phone only when truly needed. Calm does not arrive by accident. It's cultivated intentionally. It's also important to learn to speak to yourself with compassion. Many times your mind won't stop because you're fighting against yourself. When you make mistakes, don't punish yourself. Remember, we are all in process. Romans chapter 12 verse 2 speaks of renewing the mind, and that happens by replacing destructive thoughts with truth. When you catch yourself saying internally something like "I always fail," answer yourself with something realistic and hopeful like "I'm learning, and God is guiding me." Every word you speak to yourself has power over your inner state. Another thing you can do is establish moments of peace throughout your day. You don't need hours, just a few minutes. When you wake up, pause to give thanks for 3 things. Midday, hand one worry over to God. Before sleeping, remember one good thing that happened. These small gestures keep you connected to God's peace and teach you that peace is built step by step. It will also help you greatly to have a physical place where you can be alone with God. It doesn't have to be big or special. It can be a chair, a corner, or a table. Place your Bible, a notebook, and something that reminds you of His faithfulness. Each time you feel your mind spinning out of control, go to that place, sit, read a psalm, and write a few lines about what you feel. Little by little, that space will become your mental and spiritual refuge. Another important point is to act on the small things. Sometimes the mind doesn't stop because you feel overwhelmed by everything pending. Start by solving just one thing. Do what you can today. The Bible teaches that whoever is faithful in little will be faithful in much. Finishing something simple gives you a sense of control, and your mind relaxes when it sees progress. Finally, prepare your mind before sleeping. 1 hour beforehand, put away your screens, plan the next day, and say a short prayer. You can read a brief passage such as John chapter 14 verse 27, where Jesus says He gives us His peace, and write a phrase of trust, like "I rest in the peace of Christ." If thoughts return during the night, don't be afraid, just breathe, repeat a truth of faith, and rest again. All of this doesn't aim to shut down your mind, but to teach you to direct it toward God. He doesn't expect you not to think. He wants you to think with Him. When you learn to hand your thoughts over to His presence, your inner noise becomes silent prayer, and that prayer opens the path to deep, real, and lasting peace. Second part, how to face intrusive thoughts and find calm amid noise. When thoughts become persistent, when you repeat the same ideas in your head over and over without finding rest, the most important thing to remember is this: you are not your thoughts. The mind can produce thousands of ideas a day, some filled with truth, others born from fear, exhaustion, or the past. The mistake many make is believing that everything that passes through the mind deserves attention or must be believed. The spiritual reality is different. Not every thought comes from you, nor does every thought come from God. Some simply arise from the world's noise or from unhealed wounds. God doesn't ask you to fight your thoughts, but to bring them captive into His presence. In the second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 10, verse 5, the Apostle Paul says, "We must take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ." That means every time a thought torments you, don't fight it with another thought. Give it to God. For example, if your mind tells you that you can't, don't argue with it. Respond with faith. "I can do all things through Christ." That way, divine truth has the last word, not fear. When thoughts chase you, don't feed them with resistance. Imagine your mind as a river. If you try to stop the water with your hands, it only overflows more. But if you watch its movement and let it flow, it naturally calms. The same happens with your mind. When a thought arrives, observe it, acknowledge it, and then let it go without attachment. Tell God, "This is troubling me, but I leave it in your hands," and trust that He can carry it better than you. It's also important to identify where those thoughts come from. There are 3 main sources: your own mind, your environment, and spiritual influences. Your mind can remind you of past mistakes or create future scenarios that don't yet exist. The environment can fill you with fear through negative news or constant exposure to unsettling content. And finally, the enemy can whisper lies to sow confusion and doubt. The key is to recognize that any thought that doesn't bring peace, hope, or purpose does not come from God. He never speaks from fear or despair. When a thought steals your peace, pause and ask yourself, does this align with the peace of God? If the answer is no, don't accept it. Respond with truth. Isaiah chapter 26 verse 3 says that God keeps in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast on him. That means when your mind focuses on the divine, anxiety weakens. Not because the problems disappear, but because you stop looking at the storm and start looking at the one who commands it. Something very powerful you can practice is replacing noise with the word. It's not enough to try not to think about something. You must fill that space with truth. If your mind repeats phrases of fear, repeat verses of hope. If it tells you there's no way out, repeat that nothing is impossible for God. If it tells you you're worthless, repeat that you are his creation, made in his image. Light and darkness cannot occupy the same space at the same time. When the word dwells in your mind, the noise loses its strength. Another practical tool is to speak to God out loud. Don't let your thoughts live only inside you. Bring them out in conversation. Tell him what you feel in your own words, without formality or fear. Share what troubles you, what you don't understand, what you can't release. Sometimes the mind calms not because everything is solved, but because you finally stop carrying the weight alone. When you speak with God, you turn anxiety into dialogue, and in that dialogue, the soul finds relief. It also helps to care for your physical environment. A disturbed mind needs an ordered space. Visual clutter creates mental noise. Make small changes. Open the curtains. Let light in. Clean the area where you work or rest. These simple acts send signals to your mind that there is harmony and control. God is a God of order, and outer order can help restore inner balance. In moments of repetitive thinking, use what I call the interruption prayer. Don't wait for the thought to pass on its own. Pause briefly and say something like, "Lord, I know you are here. I don't have to understand everything, I just need to trust." This short phrase changes the direction of your thoughts and turns them into prayer. You don't have to shout or say it perfectly, just speak it from the heart. That immediate connection with God breaks the mental cycle of anxiety. When your mind insists on showing you catastrophic future scenarios, remember what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, verse 34. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Worrying about what hasn't happened is wasting energy on a tomorrow that doesn't yet exist. Faith doesn't ask you to ignore the future. It invites you to walk toward it with trust. Every time your mind pushes you to imagine the worst, answer, "Today I have God with me," and that is enough. Also remember that your thoughts do not define your worth. You're not less spiritual for having doubts, nor less faithful for feeling fear. Everyone, even the most devoted men and women of the Bible, faced moments when their minds betrayed them. The prophet Elijah, after great victories, felt so overwhelmed that he wanted to give up. Yet in the midst of that chaos, God didn't scold him. He gave him rest, food, and new direction. That's who God is. He doesn't expect mental perfection. He expects honesty. If your mind is tired, learn to stop before anxiety grows. Don't try to solve everything in one day. Focus on what you can do today and trust the rest. When Jesus was in the storm with his disciples, the boat was shaking violently, but he slept. Not because he didn't care, but because he was at peace with the Father. That same peace is available to you when you choose to rest in his will, even while the waves keep crashing. Remember this, not every thought deserves your energy. You don't need to analyze everything or understand every idea that crosses your mind. Learn to discern whether something comes from fear or from God. If a thought leads you to love, forgiveness, or hope, embrace it. If it leads you to guilt, doubt, or discouragement, release it. Peace isn't found in controlling the mind, but in choosing which seeds you allow to grow within it. In the end, true mental freedom isn't having an empty mind, but a focused one. A mind that, though it thinks, is not ruled by its thoughts. And that kind of mind is formed when you learn to view your thoughts through faith, seeing them without fear, without judgment, and surrendering them to the one who can transform them. When you do this consistently, you'll notice that the mental storm begins to lose strength. Worries will still appear, but they'll no longer have power over you. You'll realize that peace doesn't come from outside. It comes from within, when you allow God to reign over your thoughts. Third part, how to maintain peace even when nothing changes. One of the hardest tests for the mind and heart is staying calm when the situation around you doesn't improve. It's easy to trust when everything goes well, But when the days grow long, prayers seem unanswered, and circumstances remain the same. That's when faith becomes real. The mind begins to make noise, to question, to doubt. And that mental noise doesn't always come from a lack of faith, but from the fatigue of waiting. Yet there's a deep truth you must understand. The peace of God does not depend on the outcome. It depends on the relationship you maintain with Him during the process. When things don't change, the first thing we tend to do is question. You ask yourself if you did something wrong, if God has forgotten you, or if perhaps you don't deserve the answer you've been waiting for. But none of those voices come from God. He doesn't speak through guilt or despair. His voice always brings comfort, direction, and hope. When your mind bombards you with thoughts of doubt, stop and remember what Psalm 46 verse 1 says. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. The word present doesn't mean immediate. It means constant. He is always there, even when silence feels long. There are moments when God allows silence, not because He isn't listening, but because He's forming something inside you. Sometimes the answer doesn't arrive because the maturity to sustain it must come first. Waiting becomes a training ground for the soul. During that time, the mind can grow impatient, but this is when you must remember that your faith is not measured by how quickly you receive what you ask for, but by how firmly you stand while you wait. When you feel anxiety growing, try a simple yet powerful exercise. Instead of asking, "Why isn't this changing?" ask, "What can I learn from this?" That question completely redirects your mind. It moves you from despair to growth. Every process hides a purpose, and often the inner noise only quiets when you realize that not everything is about obtaining something. Sometimes it's about becoming someone new in the waiting. It's also important to remember that peace doesn't mean passivity. Remaining calm isn't staying still. It's acting with wisdom and faith, not impulse. Sometimes, when nothing changes, we try to force results, and that only creates more confusion. But when you learn to move under God's guidance, your steps have purpose, even if the path is slow. In Psalm 37, verse 7, we are told to be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. That stillness isn't resignation, it's active trust. It's walking quietly, but with faith. A practical way to maintain peace while waiting is to create a steady spiritual routine. Though it may seem simple, the mind needs structure. If you dedicate a few minutes every day to praying, reading scripture, and writing what you feel, you train your mind to focus on the eternal rather than the temporary. It's not about the amount of time, but about consistency. A restless mind finds calm when it has direction. When you make your time with God a daily appointment, the noise begins to fade, and little by little, your soul learns to rest. Another key is learning to separate faith from emotion. Many people confuse feeling peace with having faith, but faith doesn't always feel. Sometimes it's simply a choice. There will be days when you feel nothing, when your mind is full of doubt, and still your faith remains intact if you keep choosing to trust. Job, in the midst of his suffering, didn't understand why he was enduring so much, but he said, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him." That is the faith that silences the noise, the peace that doesn't depend on mood, but on character. When the inner noise tells you that nothing is working, repeat this truth to yourself: "I don't need to understand everything to trust God." That simple phrase can transform the way you experience waiting, because often what steals your peace isn't the problem itself, but the need to have all the answers. Faith is not about knowing, it's about resting. It's trusting that even if you don't see the full path, God already knows the destination. It's also important to watch the language you use with yourself during hard days. Every word you speak reinforces a mental state. If you constantly tell yourself, I can't take it anymore, or nothing will change, your mind sinks deeper into hopelessness. But if you start declaring words of faith, even before you see results, your mind begins to align with hope. It's not about denying reality, it's about remembering that reality is not the end of the story. In Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21, we're taught that life and death are in the power of the tongue. Speak life, even in the waiting. When emotional exhaustion builds up, learn to rest, truly rest. Rest isn't always sleep. Sometimes it's pausing for a moment, breathing, walking, looking at the sky, and remembering that life remains in God's hands. Jesus himself in the Gospels withdrew to lonely places to pray. If the Son of God needed silence, how much more do we? Spiritual silence is not emptiness, it's space for God's voice to be heard more clearly. Another way to keep peace is to practice gratitude, even when you don't feel you have reasons. Gratitude isn't just saying thank you, it's an act of faith. It's recognizing that even if you haven't received what you asked for, you've already been given more than you deserve. When you give thanks, you shift your focus from the problem to God's provision. Each time your mind begins to complain, stop and think of 3 things you do have today. You'll see how your soul quiets and anxiety fades. Remember also that peace isn't always a feeling. Often it's a decision. Choosing peace means deciding not to react impulsively, not to let emotions drive your actions. It's pausing before you speak, breathing before you respond, praying before you act. And when you do that, something miraculous happens. You begin to feel an inner strength you didn't know you had. That strength is the peace of God working within you. If the external situation remains the same, it doesn't mean God isn't working. Sometimes the greatest miracle isn't that circumstances change, but that you change within them. That inner transformation is the greatest proof of God's presence. When you can stay calm in the storm, you are no longer a slave to the noise. You are led by faith. And if one day you feel weak again, remember that you are not alone. Everyone who has sought God has walked through nights of silence, days without answers, and moments when their minds wanted to give up. But the same God who sustained them sustains you. In Isaiah chapter 40, verses 29 through 31, it says that he gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. That is the promise that renews the mind and sustains the soul. True peace is not the absence of noise, it's the certainty that God remains in control, even when you can't feel him. It's the serenity that lets you keep moving forward when there are no visible results, and the comfort that tells you everything has a purpose even if you don't yet understand it. Keeping peace in the middle of chaos isn't weakness, it's a spiritual act of power. It's a silent declaration of trust. Part 4. Peace as spiritual strength and weapon against chaos. Reaching peace is a gift, but maintaining it is a daily battle. It is not passive peace, but a living, active peace that stands before the storm and says, "My trust doesn't depend on what I see, but on whom I believe in." And that kind of peace becomes your greatest spiritual strength, one that lets you stand when the world seems to tremble, and that sustains you when everything seems to collapse. Often we think peace is fragile, that it can break at any problem, but the truth is the opposite. True peace is the evidence of God's power within you. It is not weakness, it is mastery. It is not indifference, it is control under the direction of the Spirit. When Jesus walked among the crowds, he faced betrayal, criticism, and pain, but nothing could knock him off center. That stability did not come from the absence of problems, but from the constant presence of the Father. And that same peace, the one that overcame the cross, is available to you. The human mind tends to move with the wind of emotions. Today you're fine, tomorrow you feel you can't go on. Today you believe, tomorrow you doubt. But when the Spirit of God dwells in you, he teaches you to anchor yourself in something deeper than your emotions, in truth. That truth reminds you that though circumstances change, God's character does not. He remains faithful, good, your refuge. And when that conviction becomes your foundation, peace becomes an invisible wall that protects you from the world's chaos. Peace does not eliminate conflicts, but it teaches you to face them with wisdom. It's like a shield that extinguishes the fiery darts of anxiety, fear, anger, or guilt. When someone offends you, peace gives you the ability to respond calmly, not with rage. When something doesn't go as planned, peace reminds you you didn't lose control because you were never meant to be in control. God was. Every time you choose to respond from peace, you win a battle that the enemy wanted you to lose from within. There's a powerful passage in John 14:27 where Jesus says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid." That phrase holds a deep revelation. Jesus didn't offer peace as a future promise, but as a present legacy. It's an inheritance that already belongs to you, but one you must learn to practice. He says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." That means you have the authority to decide whether your heart will be shaken or not. You are not a victim of your thoughts or emotions. You are a child of God, and that gives you spiritual authority over what happens within you. When you understand this, you begin to use peace as a weapon. When the enemy throws thoughts of fear at you, you respond from rest. When he provokes anxiety, you answer with serenity. That calm disarms him, because the enemy thrives on chaos, but God's peace dismantles him. In Philippians 4:7 we are told that the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. It's not a peace you understand, it's a peace you live, you feel, that protects you even when you can't explain why you're calm in the storm. A mind governed by peace thinks clearly. Anxiety clouds, it weighs down. Peace illuminates, it clarifies. Anxiety reacts, peace chooses. Anxiety makes you run without direction. Peace makes you walk with purpose. That's why peace doesn't just give you rest, it gives you direction. When you learn to remain calm, you can hear God's voice more clearly. Not because he doesn't speak when you're upset, but because the internal noise prevents you from hearing him. God doesn't shout, he whispers. And only those who are in peace can hear the whisper. When your mind fills with thoughts of fear, repeat inside yourself, "I will lack nothing, for God is with me." That simple phrase, eternal in truth, has immense power. Psalm 23 is not just a prayer, it's a declaration of spiritual dominion. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Nothing, no peace, no comfort, no hope. That certainty changes the atmosphere, calms the heart, and makes darkness retreat. Another way peace becomes your strength is through your ability to discern. An unsettled mind confuses emotions with divine direction. Sometimes you believe God is showing you something, but in reality, it's fear shouting. Peace, however, helps you recognize the right voice. God does not lead from rush or panic. When a decision comes accompanied by serenity, even if challenging, it's likely from him. When you feel urgency, anxiety, or confusion, do not act. Wait. Peace is the filter that distinguishes divine will from your own will. That capacity to discern is essential, because a single decision made in noise can alter the course of your life, but a decision made in peace can open doors of blessing. That's why whenever you face something important, pray, "Lord, do not let me move unless there is peace in my heart." That short prayer, simple but powerful, prevents many mistakes. And when the world pressures you, when you feel everything pushes you to react, remember Jesus before Pilate. In the midst of the most unjust trial in history, he did not answer with anger. He didn't defend himself with words because he knew truth doesn't need to shout. Peace was his language, and with that serenity, he conquered chaos. That same calm is available for you every time you choose trust instead of fear. Peace also gives you strength to forgive. Resentment is one of the greatest causes of anxiety. When you hold on to anger, your mind repeats it like an echo that never stops. To forgive is not to justify what was done. It's to release the burden so it no longer destroys you from within. When you choose forgiveness, you choose peace over the wound. And though it may hurt at first, gradually your soul begins to breathe again. The peace that follows forgiveness is incomparable. And if one day you feel peace slipping away, don't condemn yourself. We all lose it sometimes. What matters is not staying perfect, but knowing how to return. And you always can. Breathe, pray, and remember you don't depend on yourself for calm. The Holy Spirit lives in you, and his presence is the source of that peace that cannot be imitated. When you learn to live out of peace, the world may scream, but you'll still hear God's voice. And when he speaks, everything falls into place. Because peace is not a luxury, it's a mark of spiritual maturity. It's the fruit of a deep relationship with God. It's proof that external chaos cannot dominate what's already filled with God's presence.